Hi everyone, Anne O'Connell with OC Publishing here, and welcome to the Author Journey. Today, January 25th, Tuesday, and I would be remiss being in New Scotland, Nouvelle-Écosse, Nova Scotia, not to say Happy Robbie Burns Day. Quite a historical figure, which is very relevant to today's topic. We're going to be talking about writing historical fiction. And I'm really excited today to have three authors join me, and their books are behind me here on the shelf. We have Bruce Bishop, Diann Floyd Boehm, and Apple Gidley, and I'm going to bring them up to join me now. And so we can all say hello. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to the Author
Hello,
Journey.
everybody.
And as I said, happy Robbie Burns Day.
Happy Australia Day.
And Australia Day. Oh my goodness. If we have some folks that are watching from afar, welcome. If you are watching and you have questions as we go through today's author journey, talking about writing historical fiction, please do fill them in the comment section, and we'll get to them as we have our discussion. So welcome. I'm really excited that we've been planning this for a while to finally be talking about historical fiction, which is one of my all-time favorite genres, which is, of course, why I publish it as well. So I want to welcome you guys. Thank you. And I'll have each of you talk a little bit about your books, when they were published, where they're set. And why don't we start with Apple?
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Nice to see you, wherever you are in the world. I started writing seriously in 2012, a memoir of an expatriate life. And after that, I thought, well, no one wants to hear anything more about me. So I looked around for something, and I've always really enjoyed historical fiction. And so I thought, I'm going to write historical fiction. I happen to live in the part of the world in the Caribbean that has a fascinating history, if not always an honorable history. And so Fireburn was born. And from Fireburn came the sequel, Transfer. Both were published by OC Publishing. Thank you very much, Anne. It was a very easy transition from memoir to historical fiction and publishing with OC Publishing. And so I'm continuing writing historical fiction. My next one comes out next year. This year, 2022. But that time set in Malaysia, or Malaya of the 1950s. So it's history, but not quite going back quite so far. The Caribbean books, the Saint Croix books, are set in the late 1800s through to 1917. So 1950s was actually a lot easier to research and to write than those earlier history books.
Wow.
Interesting.
Thank you so much, Apple. And I'm really excited about your next one coming up. We can talk about that a little bit later, but you're probably honing your skills in writing about historical fiction. So we'll hear a little bit more about that in a sec. So Bruce, tell us about your books.
Hi there. Yeah, my name's Bruce Bishop, and I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And both of my historical fiction novels that came out in November 2020 and June of 2021, Unconventional Daughters and Uncommon Sons, they're both set in Nova Scotia. The Daughters book begins in the 1880s in Sweden and finishes up in 1935 in Nova Scotia. And then Uncommon Sons is interlinked to Unconventional Daughters, not quite a sequel. And Uncommon Sons is more of a murder mystery historical fiction book. Yeah, that takes place in 1935-36. So I'm formerly a travel journalist and lifestyle writer who had been writing nonfiction for an awfully long time. So once the pandemic hit and I began to lose some of my jobs, novel writing seemed like the right thing to do, and I couldn't be happier with it.
Well, we're pretty happy with it too. I read both your books and was drawn in right from the get-go. I actually read the second one first, and then the first one. So I can say very confidently that either one can stand on its own. So we'll learn more about that in a minute. So Diann, tell us about your historical fiction that just came out in October.
I'll be happy to, and thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. What a pleasure it is to be with such great authors, and I can't wait to hear more about them. So I hope you'll keep listening and make all these discoveries. So I started off as a children's author, and I'm still writing children's books because it's just something I love. My background's elementary education, though I ended up teaching all the way through 8th grade as a curriculum teacher, especially in technology development. And what made me start writing, I've always been a storyteller. I love telling stories. So that was, yay, for all different ages. And we ended up in Dubai, and I needed to reinvent myself. And I had already started making the commitment to take my stories and turn them into written. And so I did. I found Anne, and she was kind enough to like my stories and publish them. So I feel very blessed. I then, after traveling and being in a lot of schools from various countries, I discovered something that was very similar in all of them, that the kiddos had a hard time figuring out about dreaming, what to be, how to make their dreams come true, because in some countries, the countries tell you what you're going to be. So I decided that I wanted them to discover that dreaming is good and figuring out how to be what you're meant to be. So I decided to write a historical fiction, which was huge for me to tackle. I had no idea how to begin. Thankfully, Anne guided me and gave me the encouragement that I needed, which we can talk about that more. And before I knew it, many moons later, my first historical fiction came out, which was based on my grandmother's life. She was born in 1904, and I wanted to use her because if she could do something so unusual, because women didn't automatically go to college back then I knew her story would inspire others. And that's how I came to be an historical fiction writer. Obviously, I'm a storyteller because I keep talking.
That's awesome. And it was such a fun story to work on. And it was like birthing a baby, even though I don't have any kids. I felt it was.
It is. Every book is.
It is an amazing story. So we got a couple of different tracks here because Diann's historical fiction is based on the real life of a family member. So let's talk about, again, one of the big differences, I think, in writing historical fiction, and you guys can jump in at any point, is the research that's involved.
That's the word. Yes,
so,
the research.
Diann, talk a little bit about, what triggered your passion for this story and where the research started for your story.
Sure. Well, the passion comes from actually knowing my grandmother and what a great role model she is as a woman. And the fact that she was, quote, even though they didn't have the word teenager back then, which was a learning curve for me to realize, that word hadn't really been coined yet to be in our everyday vocabulary, that she really was a trailblazer. And then as I started to do research, and that was, as I had told Apple once, oh my gosh, I had no idea the beast I tackled, but it was so much fun. And I think the hardest part for me was I would start reading this history, and then I'd go down a rabbit hole that had nothing to do with the book, but it was just so fascinating. And so that would be, I would say, my hardest lesson to learn was to quit going down the rabbit hole.
So would you say, and Apple, maybe you can answer this, would you say to write historical fiction, you should be a passionate history buff? Or is that important at all?
No, I think it is. I think you have to have curiosity about the past, because it's not just learning and finding out the facts. It's all about the facts, but you have to also look into the how people dressed, what they ate, the terminology they used. Forget about the actual background of the story. And even if you're researching and you find one little line that you think, and you've read a whole book and you've only got one line out of it, that's okay. Because that one line can give your book authenticity. And it's the authenticity that's really important. And I think one of the hardest things I have found, and I'm sure Diann and Bruce have found it as well, is that the terminology that we use today is different to the terminology used in the time that we're writing about. And what back in the day was deemed acceptable is not deemed now. And so as a historical fiction writer, you have to balance what is acceptable. The book I'm currently editing is it talks about the war in Japan or in Malaysia. And I've learned that in exposition, I use the word Japanese, but in dialogue, I might refer to the bloody Japs because that was the way it was spoken then. I sort of feel if it's in dialogue, you can get away with it because it is insulting, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. But in dialogue, two people are speaking about that time period, and so it's acceptable, but not in exposition.
Right. And Apple mentions, controversial and sensitive topics, and I'm going to throw this one to you, Bruce, because I've read your books. You take it from a very unique perspective, not just unique in a way that it's historical fiction and written in a different time, but your main character in Uncommon Sons. We talk a little bit about that and the challenge of writing that character set in the time that it was set in.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to ask me about the daughters first, so I was mentally,
Rewind.
Okay. All right. In Uncommon Sons, the protagonist, the main character, is a first-generation Canadian of Lebanese parents who had emigrated from Lebanon in the 1800s. And we meet him in the first book, in Unconventional Daughters, as a secondary character and the best friend of the female protagonist in Unconventional Daughters. So in Uncommon Sons, Mark is a hotel dining room manager in Halifax, and he is torn between his cultural traditions and upbringing as a Lebanese man, but also he's gay and he's closeted and has to be closeted. It's the 1930s. You could be thrown in jail or lose your job and or both, or kicked out of your family, any number of things. So he's a complex character in many ways, but it was all the other characters that I wrote about and had to research on or find out more about that I found a little bit even more fascinating. One complex character triggered a bunch of others, and I didn't expect to be writing a murder mystery, and that's sort of how it turned out. But I did quickly wanted to mention though, with Unconventional Daughters, and I didn't go out with the intention of writing historical fiction whatsoever, but the premise of Unconventional Daughters is a naive budding journalist marries her stepfather in 1922. And this is based on an actual incident that happened here in Nova Scotia in the 1920s. And I have the handwritten letters that she wrote to her mother on her honeymoon.
Wow.
To that was the inspiration. And I've been sitting on these letters since I was 18 years old. And took them out a couple of years ago and thought I should write a book about this and make up all the stories about this family, because my family knew this woman and her mother, and of course I had to change all the names and I had to imagine what their family back in Sweden or Denmark might have been like. So what a journey it is to write historical fiction. I'm sure Apple Diann would agree.
So that you're talking about your gay protagonist, that is a classic example of language that you, back in the day, you could use the word gay as to mean lighthearted, festive, all the rest of it. Now it's such a completely different connotation that it's it's right in my head at the moment because, as I said, I'm dealing with it right now. I'm thinking, okay, and let's change the word to lighthearted.
Yeah.
Word that was used at the time period I'm writing about. So, it's a good example of how
Language
cultural
changes.
norms and acceptances change.
That's right. I have a secondary character in Uncommon Sons, who's what we now would say African Nova Scotian, a cook at this hotel, and he's involved with a white woman who works at the hotel as well. So in my author notes at the end of Uncommon Sons, I did want to let the reader know that the reason why I was using the word Negro and the word colored throughout my book was because that was the common parlance of the day in the 1930s. There's no such a thing, as an African Nova Scotian or a Black Nova Scotian. They were Negroes or they were colored, and that was the way that, as you say, you want to be true to the parlance of the day.
It's great. You're navigating quite a minefield, and in Rise, Diann, you had several, controversial issues that were addressed in the book. And not only did you have to research for the historical accuracy, but you were also writing for middle grade, right? So, there were instances, and again, and sensitivity to your family, right? I mean, what were some of those challenges?
Well, I agree with both Bruce and Apple and you, the minefields, but also because I grew up in a family where you love everybody because of who they are and try to pick friends that are very heart-centered. I found it was very difficult for me to actually use some of the words of that time period. So I almost felt like I needed to go to confession. Bruce,
keep writing, right?
Right, I kept writing. So I would use the word for today, and then I'd make it red, and then I'd go back and put in the right word at the end because I just couldn't bring myself to use that language. Isn't that horrible? But I love what Bruce did, that after your story you wrote a disclaimer, so to speak. But I find it absolutely fascinating to I fall in love with the language of different time periods, and think it's interesting how it morphs over time, like Apple was saying with the word gay. I like to sing, and so when you sing some of the songs like that Doris Day used to do, and you sit here and you just go, oh my God, I can't believe they used that word.
Graham Greene wrote, I don't know in what book, many years ago, that in order to be a good writer, you have to retain a splinter of ice in your heart. And
nice.
All those feelings of our sensitivities, and you just have to, you write a rape scene and you think, oh my God, I hope people don't think I've been raped. I haven't, You have to block that off. Splinter of ice. There you go. Thank you.
I love that.
Yeah. And of course, when you're writing, you put yourself in your character's mind and body and environment.
Well, they put themselves in you.
Well, yes, that's true too. Yes.
Yeah.
When Bruce said he didn't know he was going to write a mystery, I'm like, well, that's because your characters were telling you what was going to happen, right? And that always happens. And for Apple, you're writing about a very sensitive time in the history of Saint Croix, starting and leading up to the transfer from Danish rule to US. And that has its own challenges, like in the historical sense and the cultural sense.
Yes, it did. The Fireburn takes place 30 years after emancipation, but very little had actually changed. So you have all those sensitivities of the fact that the laborers were no longer enslaved, and yet their conditions were pretty much exactly the same as they had been when they were enslaved. Not on all estates, but on the vast majority. So it was difficult. But there was a little bit of pushback occasionally from a few people here, but on the whole, it's been accepted very well. And what I try and say to people is that this little island's history is being spread around the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's fantastic. That's so cool.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about, like, how did you research your main character as a female plantation owner in 1800s? Probably wasn't very common.
No, it wasn't. No. Which is why her father was still alive when she came. So it was an easier transition for her. There was no one else to take over. That her brother had died, and so she was there. I guess some of it was, I wish there'd been more people like this, and there were women plantation owners throughout the Caribbean. I think predominantly more in the Spanish and French islands rather than the British and Danish. So she was a sort of character that I wished had been around a bit more, I suppose. She was gutsy and wasn't going to be put down. I truly believe women hold, excuse me, Bruce, but women are the glue that hold families together.
And you know what? There was no shortage of gutsy women during that time, because it was women who led Fireburn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so I like writing strong female protagonists.
She sounds like she was the Annie Oakley of her day.
Yeah. So what were the biggest challenges? What were the hurdles that had to be overcome that are specific to writing historical fiction? I mean, we've touched on a few things like the language of the day, you know, and different vernacular and that kind of thing. But, you know, was there something that really made you stumble and stop and think?
Yeah, for me, I think it was the fact that I'm not Lebanese, of Lebanese descent. I wanted to be true to the culture and the nation and the people. So not only was there a lot of historical research to do, but I asked a Nova Scotian woman here who is from Lebanon to read the book cover to cover after the first draft. And I said, please check for inconsistencies, please check for things that might offend the Lebanese community, and got the A-OK from her. And similarly with the African Nova Scotian character who is dating a white Nova Scotian, I asked friends of mine who got married, a black guy and a white girl, right out of high school back in the late 1970s, to both read the book. And again, if I was overstepping my boundaries because I'm not black, I needed to know, because I was also including the history of a community in Halifax called Africville, which no longer exists thanks to the systemic racism that happened here in the 1960s. And again, they gave me the A-OK on the manuscript, so I felt a whole lot better after that. You know, no author ever wants to be accused of cultural appropriation or assuming things, or God forbid, lapsing into you know, stereotypical images.
Yeah,
and good point. Like, I'm sorry, Anne. Excuse me.
I was just going to say, more and more these days, you know, we do seek the assistance of a sensitivity reader. You know, especially in this day and age. Sorry, go ahead, Apple.
No, I was going to say that's, you know, interesting you say that, Bruce, because that's exactly what I did with particularly Fireburn, the first one, in that I have a very dear African-American friend on the mainland. And at one stage I do use the N-word. And to your point, Diann, I felt, So I said to her, you know, I'm warning you, this is what I've used. I need you, I believe it's in context, but I need you to tell me if I shouldn't. And she gave me the okay. And then, God love her, she also gave it to her father to read, who was just wonderful elderly chap. And he said, oh, honey, go ahead, you're fine. Now, just having that makes you take a deep sigh and think, okay, this works. It's not being offensive for being offensive's sake, you know, and some people do write like that. It's a shock value, but that's not, I think if you write like that, you lose your readership. And what's the point? What are you trying to prove?
We do have, I want Diann to address the biggest challenge hurdle for her, and then we've got a couple of questions from from the folks who are watching. So Diann, biggest hurdle, toughest challenge.
Believe it or not, mine is very similar to Bruce's. But on a side note, before I go to that, Bruce, I just want to tell you, Lebanon is one of my favorite countries to visit, and it's so, so beautiful. So I do hope you get to go sometime if you haven't. The caves are incredible. I found it to be very spiritual. Believe it or not, my hurdle was the same thing. People think, oh, everybody in America is exactly the same. But if you're keeping up with the news, most people will let you know. If you live on the East Coast and the West Coast, they're similar in their thinking, and they hate us people in the center. So, and then you have so what can you do? And then you have, especially in that time period, since I'm from Texas and I'm from the lower end, Texas is a huge state, and so what people need in the valley, their needs are very different from where I am in the Austin area in the central Texas, and those people on West Texas or East Texas are very different, and definitely the people in the Panhandle are totally different. So if you can imagine, if I can say that about one state, and then all of a sudden I'm talking about people in Oklahoma, which are extremely different than the people in Missouri, and now with my second book, the continuation, Chicago, well, that's a real learning experience because for me, as a young girl with rosy glasses, I mean, young girl like a young mom with my kids going to college, I thought everybody raised their kids like me. You had them home at 10 o'clock. You didn't drink because that would hurt your body. Why would you ever want to do that, much less anything else? And you would follow the 10 Commandments. Therefore, you were very kind to your parents. And I just thought everybody raised their kids like that. And so it was like an eye shocker when my kids ended up in another state that I won't mention, and I'm like, no, parents didn't raise their kids like that. I never heard of such a thing. Much less now discovering things about my grandmother in the 1920s going all the way to Chicago, and Chicago is like,
by yourself
oh
on
my
a train.
gosh. I'm like, I have so much to learn. So I would say that's the biggest hurdle, is to make sure that I am truthful in describing how my grandmother, who is actually very similar to me. So you have a woman who didn't cuss in the 1920s, but she did love to dance. But her eyes are in shock because the women in Chicago are a little bit further advanced in knowledge of the world. And so I just want to be very truthful to that. So.
But she was also a woman who knew how to handle a shotgun and could deliver a baby.
Yeah, that was my grandma. That was her mama.
Oh, that was her mama.
Yeah, it was her mama. Yeah. So, and that was really fun to bring out. And I would say the other sensitivity I had was, as far as getting people to read my book ahead of time to improve, I actually had to make sure that my cousins, when I was talking about their family, that they gave me the approval because you wanted to keep the family. Our family is very close knit, so I know my fourth cousins. How many people know that, right? So we all love each other.
Yeah, you also had the museums and historical societies in each of those towns, which was really critical to have them on board. So I want to make sure that we get to some of these questions. With Lana Shoup, who is with Atlantic Book Reviews, and she's actually joining us from Alberta, Red Deer, Alberta, and hopefully moving home to Nova Scotia soon, right, Lana? Anyway, she asks, how much time did each author spend on research before actually sitting down to write?
Oh my gosh.
Laughing, so you go first. Everybody's reading.
I read rapaciously anyway, and when I'm getting ready to write a book, I just read everything I can about the country, the period, the customs, the everything. I read recipes just so I can be completely immersed in that culture. And I think some of that I've been helped because I've lived in so many different cultures that is a natural curiosity for me. What I don't do is I don't read anything else. I only focus on that country until I start writing. And I normally have, a kernel of an idea. I know where its story's going to start. I sort of have a vague idea of where it's going, and I haven't got a clue how I'm going to get there. Very, very intense character studies of the main characters, and then they start leading me to where I need to get to.
So what's a time frame for you? I mean, I know that you're pretty much full-time.
I am, yeah.
So.
Well, I started researching the book after this one that's coming out this year, which is set predominantly in India. I started just dabbling into it about 6 months ago, and as soon as this edit is over, then I will dive straight in and just focus on that, probably for the next 3 or 4 months.
Okay.
And I take notes constantly, so about 3 or 4 months before I actually really serious research before I start writing.
Well, just FYI, and we haven't announced officially, but we do have a new author who's signed on with OC Publishing. Stay tuned, and her book is set in India. So, yeah.
Do our initials start with PS?
No.
Oh, okay.
MB. More to come on that. So, Bruce, how about you? How long do you research? And
it's hard to quantify the number of hours, but I found that I would do the research as I was writing. So that made it easier for me anyway. I mean, that sounds quite different from Apple. But again, you've got to find things that you never thought existed. And when I'm reading medical journals from the 1920s and realizing that what we now know as Alzheimer's disease wasn't even discovered by Dr. Alzheimer until 1915. So my time period, anybody who was acting as if he or she had dementia, they were, if not shut into an institution, they would have to go through sleep therapy, and that was drugged sleep for 2 weeks at a time.
Wow.
So things like that excited me to then develop a character's traits even more. And I won't say anything more about the character in the book. But
that was a hard section to read, by the way, for me.
And for me, because of having gone through it myself with my father. Yeah.
That's tough.
Diann, how about you? I know that I know what the timeline was.
The timeline for Ruby was large because it was a learning curve.
But we also had several books that were written in between that we published. So
yes,
really,
thank goodness.
Yeah.
But in reference to where I'm at now, working on the follow-up to Rise, I'm sort of a combination of Apple and Bruce because I needed to really understand the 1920s speakeasy, everything that was going on in that time period, and also the women's movement. So I knew already where the story was going, but now I needed to really study. So now I'm writing the chapters, and like Bruce, as I start writing and the characters become more to life, I have to stop, or I choose to stop, and then I want to find out a little bit more, and then from there I'll go on. So I can't say that, oh, I studied, for 6 months before, with like Apple, right? It was a combination, and like Apple, I discover when I talk about Ruby being with Mrs. McLeary that, they spent the day cooking or whatever that Sunday, and I'll throw in the name of a fun recipe that was very popular back then, so to speak. So just to kind of make things a little interesting. And also people up north eat a lot differently than us people down south because the temperature is different. So when you're in Chicago, you're like freezing in the summertime as far as I'm concerned. You say 60 degrees and I want the fire going. I think it's summertime. So. And for you people up in Nova Scotia, you have to be laughing.
Oh my goodness. And for
60 probably sounds good to you.
Yeah, in Lana and Red Deer, I'm sure it's colder and snowing. We actually had snow all day today. But you make a really good point is, the research, and Apple alluded to it as well, includes, what do they eat? What ingredients go into different recipes? Was there certain ingredients at one point? and I can't remember what book. Oh, it might have been Rise working on, and we were talking about, eating a banana, and one of the editors said, how easy would it have been to get bananas in, oil tin at that point in time, type thing.
Right. Right.
So I think those are really interesting points. If anybody has any other questions, we've got to get wrapping up soon. Do you guys have any words of wisdom for anybody who's thinking of launching into the writing of a historical fiction?
Yes, go for it.
Go for it.
Yes, there you go.
Why not? And even if your book is never published, you learn such a lot through the research. And talking to Bruce, saying that you research as you go along. All the books I use, I make copious notes, but I also have a gazillion, little stickers down. It's like a separate lot of leaves down the side of a book, and I think, that's where I had that. I need to go and check back. So it's a constant process of checking back, but you've got the nub of the research is done before I start writing.
Yeah, I often thought to myself, how did historical fiction authors before Mr. Google, how did they do it? Because Google has been amazing to find out little nitpicky details about things. And I thought to myself, especially in writing Uncommon Sons, that because it's 1935-36 and there's the stirrings of another war maybe happening, and you're in the middle of the Great Depression. So I would look at hotel menus, because the book takes place at a hotel menus at Christmas time, to see what they were eating on their special menus, and finding out that, believe it or not, Jell-O put out a Coca-Cola flavored Jell-O in 1936.
Wow.
1935. And everybody thought it was going to be like this huge, tremendous success. And it was pulled off the shelves in 1936. So it didn't work. But then you find out little things that you can include with your characters. Gone with the Wind came out in 1936. So I have a minor character sitting in his living room with his feet up, opening Gone with the Wind to read it. Nobody knew it would be this tremendous bestseller. So I love the pop culture trivia from the
and then that's what makes your book authentic.
Yes.
That's not these little snippets that are dropped in. It shows you have done your research, because there will always be someone that says, I don't think that's right, and you say, well, go check it. It is right. So
yeah. I had a review on, I won't say what platform, that took me to task on a couple of the medical issues in Unconventional Daughters, and she was wrong. I did my research. I know that what I put in the book was correct. And yet you can't respond to a review on Amazon or Goodreads or whatever. You've just got to let it wash over you and think, okay, you can pretend that you're the expert, but you're not.
Right. And one last question. Lana also asks, do the authors have interest in writing other genres or stick to historical fiction? Well, we know that Diann also writes children's books. And you never know what else might pop in, but is that really what you're going to focus on, Apple? You did write a memoir.
Yeah, I'm actually sort of halfway through a contemporary novel, which is great fun, and it's so freeing because there's really remarkably little research you need to do. But no, my heart is in historical fiction. This was sort of a playbook. It was fun to, it's fun to write, and I'll see where it goes.
And how about you, Bruce?
Well, for me, I do have book number 3 in mind, but that's really, except for a few pages written, that's really as far as it's gotten to. I wouldn't really call what I'm doing at the moment a different genre, but I'm adapting Unconventional Daughters into a 9-hour television series.
Ooh,
and
nice.
I've had to learn so much about the film and TV industry and what sells now and who is looking for this, and is a period drama too expensive to produce? I mean, we all know about Downton Abbey and a series like that, but I'm having so much fun with it. And there's actually a TV production company in Denmark that's reading what's called my TV series Bible, and that's kind of like a summation of the whole book, but in 10 pages. So cross your fingers.
I'll cross my fingers.
Wow.
I just want to say before we close too, I want to encourage people, if you're thinking about writing, I absolutely love historical fiction. And so if there is some topic that you are solely interested in, then start there. And just as Apple said, start writing. Because if you keep putting it off, it's never going to happen. But what is so beautiful about historical fiction is you're studying about real people, real things, and how it has influenced the world. No matter where you are, it's still impacted the world in some way or another. And that's what I love about historical fiction.
Oh, I love that. What a wonderful note to start to wrap up on. We did have a question as well. Marianne Ward, who does a lot of work for OC Publishing, is wondering if Apple's book is coming out with us. But I believe that if you would like to share, Apple, your next book.
Oh, thank you. No, it's not coming out with OC Publishing. I'm sorry, because
I love.
because I've now got a traditional publisher, so I'm very grateful.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you.
So that's coming out in September this year, and it's called "Have You Eaten Rice Today?" And Joe Parford, who I believe both of you know, came up with the title. So thank you, Joe.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's very exciting.
And you can share the name of the company if you would like.
Oh, okay, thank you. It's Fine Leaves Press, who is publishing it in September.
You are amazing. I highly was so excited when you told me. And Bruce's books were published by, if you want to share your publisher, so we can.
Well, they're really self-published, honestly, with great assistance from a fellow in New Brunswick, Icarus Press.
Okay.
So yeah, and right now they're only available on Amazon and Rakuten Kobo.
Excellent. Well, guys, oh my goodness, everybody says congratulations. So exciting. I love the genre. You guys are incredible. Thank you so much for joining me today and talking about the challenges, the joys and pitfalls of writing historical fiction. So I hope you guys will come back again sometime. And
thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you for having us.
And
so
great
much.
to meet you guys.
And you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And thank you, everybody, for watching the author journey today. We're again celebrating Robbie Burns Day. So all of my friends in Scotland, here we are in New Scotland, New Valley Coast, Nova Scotia. And we'll say bye for now. Thank you guys for joining in, and we'll see you again next time on the author journey. Bye for now.